Welcome to one more edition of Politics on Right. I'm Egberto Willis, your host. I'm here with Dr. David Campt. Dr. David Campt is what I like to call an orator, a discusser, a talker of items of importance to our national dialogue. Welcome aboard, Dr. Campt. How are you doing today?
I'm doing fine. It's great to be here.
Great. Well, look, last night's debate, how would you characterize last night's debate?
Well, I think it's kind of sad, really. I'm not sure that advanced anything. I think that while we know that a lot of people have made up their minds, I do think that it is useful for these debates to elevate us, to give us a sense that we're part of something larger, that they're in a larger tradition of American political discourse. And that debate did not do that. So I think I think a lot of people feel vaguely unclean about it and dissatisfied and not informed. So I don't think it accomplished that goal of having a national ritual that we can all get behind and feel like we're part of something that's been going on for a lot of years. It did not accomplish that. So that's unfortunate.
Now you were someone who works with major corporations, et cetera, in trying to foment, create good dialogue among people, maybe adversaries or otherwise. There was no sense that in that particular discussion, even using the moderator, that somehow we could have gotten to that plane where that could begin. Your thoughts?
Right. So I think that's right. But I think what's important to lift up is that there's a distinction between the debate that we perhaps need in a public setting so we can analyze candidates, and a dialogue which we need to have in private settings or even corporate settings. So here's the difference, and this important distinction to notice. A debate is a system of exchange in which your objective, each person's objective, is to find out what's wrong with the other person's point of view and to potentially lift that up. And you're not really lifting it up for them, you're really lifting it up for the sake of onlookers in most cases, right? So now there's a value in that. That is because people need to make a choice about who to vote for, and highlighting differences is valuable for that. When we as citizens or members of a community or members of a company are in actual in community with other people and trying to come to common decisions, we need to be in a more of a dialogue mode as well as debate mode. So if I'm talking to you, we're working for the same company, we're managing a company, I need to figure out why do you see something differently than I see it, and what's true in what you're saying, and you need to look at what's true in what I'm saying so we can make a collective decision. We're more of a dialogue mode than a debate mode, which is what we might need to do if we're squaring off our ideas so that other people can choose between us. So I would say that the thing last night was not edifying, but it's a debate anyway, and it has a role in our culture. But it's not. They should not be trying to have a dialogue. They should be trying to have a debate. But even as a debate, it was pretty god awful, actually.
Now, do you think that was planned by the president in order to maybe make it so chaotic that we really don't discuss the issues, which would really then have to discuss his failures?
Well, I would say that's very possible. It's hard to know. I think the difficulty with understanding his behavior is that on the one hand, he is a kind of a shrewd, savvy media manipulator, so it might be on purpose. But on the other hand, he's also a very impulsive person. And so it's hard to know whether or not what you saw is a result of a kind of impulsivity. He's thin-skinned, he's impulsive, and he wants to lash out and defend himself at every turn. So it's hard to know. I certainly think that one of the impacts of his behavior, whether it was planned or not, was to depress some people's vote. I think from a political analysis standpoint, I think that kind of behavior does not endear people to him. It might fire up some elements of his base, but he probably loses more votes than he gains. But it might have the effect of depressing people's enthusiasm. That also might be true. It's hard for me to know which is more true, but I think it has the effect of getting people less interested in the election. It's going to make a few of his base more interested in him because they like that pugilistic nature. It's going to make some people on the other side fired up because they say, we got to get rid of this guy. But then there's going to be some number of people who are like, oh, this whole thing is just ridiculous. So it's hard to know. I think we need to acknowledge the weights of all of those, but we don't know them.
I have always wondered when people say that, however, that that the debate is going to really depress people's voting because of how nasty it was or whatever. I thought that the Biden fundraising that came across yesterday pretty much proved that, hey, we need to do something here. We just can't have this guy. That's just the impression that
Oh
I
well, no,
got.
I hear you on that, but I mean, I hear you on that. That's why I said this. There's effects upon all three.
Right,
There's an effect on Biden's base. There's an effect on his base, but there is this unknown effect on the people in the middle. Let's remember, 100 million people don't vote. 40% of the American public doesn't vote. In fact, I have a project called the Voice Project. People can get to it at thedialoguecompany.com/voice, and it's all about how we bring to bear best practices in conversation to persuade people to vote or just to have a better conversation. But the reason I created so much around persuading people to vote is because 100 million people don't vote. So I'm just
right.
saying that is a not insubstantial, that's a substantial part of the American public, and we need to think about how do we motivate them and what's the impact of something like this on them.
Now, let's get a little bit substantive with what was attempted in the debate now. When we talk about race, it was interesting to me because Donald Trump has been trying to make inroads into, let's go specifically with Black people. And they gave him one specific question yesterday. It kind of befuddled me how he answered it, talking about being very good for, let's say, African Americans. Well, I rather use the word Black people, being good
let's go for Black, that's fine.
Black people. And then he immediately went on to law and order. Now, it concerned me in the beginning the way that it was set up by Wallace, where they equated, or in the same line they had race and law and order.
Well, race and violence. Race and violence.
Race and violence, which concerned me in the first place, why those two topics or those two things were linked together. Your thoughts?
Well, I noticed it too. I thought my tendency is to try to give people the benefit of the doubt. And so in doing that, I thought that what Chris Wallace gave himself was the frame of talking about race and police violence, as well as race and community violence. And what are these protests about? These protests are about unwarranted police violence. And that has to do, and that's racialized. So while I did have some suspicions and concerns, I given Chris Wallace benefit of the doubt, I thought that maybe he's going to bring up other issues. Like for some people, the issue of race and violence is primarily race and police violence, and for other people, it's a different thing. It's violence from people of a different race. So that frame I thought potentially was a large frame. They didn't bring up really police violence, so it might be that my benefit of the doubt was too much beneficial, right? That very well could be. But I think that what you saw was the way, and it was also the way that Trump moved the conversation. He moved it to the
turned it
order and tried to get Biden to say, "You don't even say law and order," which I think that was an interesting tactic. I mean, one of the things that what he did, what Biden did was say, "Well, I believe in the rule of law," which is different than the law and order. So part of what is also just interesting to notice is that Trump knows that the law and order thing is a kind of a dog whistle. It's a dog whistle. He's trying to get Biden to say that. I thought Biden's Biden's avoiding that was probably smart. He probably should have said, "Yeah, I don't like to say law and order because it seems like the way that term has gotten positioned, that says that it seems like it's an anti." It's a phrase that says we need to suppress certain groups. I also know, Mr. Trump, you don't like to say Black Lives Matter either. Why is that? I'm just saying that and it's unfortunate that these things are on opposite sides culturally. But I think that a retort he could have done is something along that line. I think he was saying, I believe in the rule of law, or you go another way. I believe in the rule of law, and I wish you would start following the law, right? Because then you could raise the issue of whether or not Mr. Trump has violated law and the rule of law by various things that he's done, both in his private life and through Attorney General Barr, as well as through various actions that the regime has done, that the administration has done.
All right, you are now the person running for president. and the issues are climate change, the issues are socioeconomic well-being of the entire country, the issues are social justice. How would you have framed that had you been Biden and able to speak without
Okay.
interruption?
Okay, I would say, Mr. Trump, in the last election, you said climate change was a hoax. Do you still? I would. One of the things I would do if I was Biden is to raise questions, is to make Trump hang himself, right? So, do you still think climate change is a hoax? 97% of all scientists think that this is real. 3% think that it might not be. You see, in the last election, you said this was a hoax. Do you still think it's a hoax? We have fires that we haven't seen. We have a hurricane level we haven't seen. Do you still think that climate change is a hoax? And notice when he brought it up, when Chris Wallace brought that up, all he talked about was like the fires, but not the other devastating impacts of climate change. We got glaciers melting, et cetera. So
I want to interrupt 1 second, because now that you brought up the forest floors, keep your thought, but I just want to say this for the audience. The ridiculousness of a president talking about raking the forest shows he has no mental form of proportionality of how large a forest really is. To think that you can have people that go out there and manage a forest, manage all these different areas. I mean, and that the moderator didn't just come in and say, sir, do you know how many hundreds of thousands of square acre or miles?
hundreds of millions.
Right.
Hundreds of millions.
How
right.
do you understand what you're saying? Are you going to hire people to rake that up? I mean, it's just impossible.
Well, there's that, but there's also the case that the 57% of forest land is managed by the federal government.
Exactly.
So you have this whole thing with that as an implicit critique of state policies, when in fact most of that land is managed by the federal government, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
But continue. I'm sorry to interrupt. It's just that you brought up the forest, and I wanted the audience to hear that particular narrative. Go ahead.
I got you. So I would, if I'm the other candidate, I would make Trump confront the issue of, does he still think climate change is a hoax? So that's one, to make him take a stand on that question, right? So you got corporations, you got the military, you have all these institutions which are essentially conservative institutions who have accepted the fact that climate change is human cause and is a problem. And I would say, do you disagree with all those people? So that's one issue, right? The other issue you said was the economy. So I mean, of course, the big issue that don't talk about well enough is income inequality, right? So now, what's really odd is that on some level, Trump ran on a populist message. The first time we thought that he was the working man's billionaire, supposedly. So, and the implicit notion is that he was going to foster a set of policies that would benefit working people. Well, you saw the tax cut did not do that, right? So I would have brought up, well, it turns out that this pandemic, which you say you didn't play a role in, you didn't cause it, but we could talk about your policy. That's a different part of the conversation. But it seems like it's widened income inequality. Like it was already a problem. It's been a problem the past 40 years, especially the past 10, and then especially this year. So what would you suggest that we need to do? Is, first of all, is that a problem? Is the gap between the rich and the poor, the super wealthy and the poor, is that an issue that we need to be thinking about and you need to do something about? I would suggest that it is, but I want to hear from you. So I would put it to him at that level, that we need to talk about income inequality. And what that also would do is it would help Biden with working class people, right? Because part of the weird part of Trump's support is it's a grievance by people, working class people. Some of that grievance is racialized, but some of it is implicitly a class base, and they feel like they've not gotten their fair share.
Doctor, I want to say something here, because I noticed that some of it is race, while some of it is class. I've come up with a new theory. I think it's really all class, right? I think race is the tool, but it's all class. Your thoughts on that?
I'm a really big fan. I would phrase it slightly differently. I would say that there's good research. You should check out a person by the name of Ian Henry Lopez. He wrote the book called Merge Left. And it's a recent book. And he talks about there's been some testing done about the different arguments against the dog whistle politics that you sometimes see from President Trump, people like him. And basically a message that people use racism to perpetuate class warfare does better in terms of attracting more people than a message that this is all about racism or it's all about class divisions. Like essentially the notion of strategic racism, which is the term we should all come to use, is something that even if you haven't heard it, like people get it. Like people, the idea that people use racism in order to enact their class suppression or class oppression.
That's what I mean. I think that's what I'm saying, right?
Right, but I'm just saying. So, but I'm just saying I would be careful of phrasing it that it's all about class, but say it's people use racism to keep different groups stratified, right? But I'm just saying I am agreeing with that, and in fact, there's good research that shows that that message does the best against the racist dog whistle message. And again, Ian Henry Lopez, you should look him up. He's somebody you should know about.
Henry Lopez, I'll look
Ian
that
Henry
up.
Lopez. Yeah,
Ian Lopez, okay. Because, you know, I've the tenet that I've always pushed, and I know we're kind of going off on a slight tangent here, but I think since you brought that up, it makes good discussion. One of the things that I've been trying to qualify is all of us have been trying to push that, well, many of us have been trying to push the issue that race is a social construct. And do you believe that, or?
Of course.
Okay, so
I think that's well established.
Right. If race is a social construct, then I don't see how you don't look at it otherwise. You know, even the implicit hate that you have within a certain group, it is something that it's a cancer that was inserted, if you will.
Right. No. I mean, yeah, I think it's well established. People who study racial issues that race is a social construct. I think it has no biological foundation. So
right.
So I think that there's broad acceptance of that among people who study it. We still need to work on the American public, but there's broad acceptance of that in the people who study it. Yeah.
Okay. So on the last,
there was a third issue, right? Because I'm just trying to make sure I covered your point.
Yes, the third. We had the climate change, we had the socioeconomic issue, and now we have the social justice issue.
So I would say there's a couple aspects of that are important to lift up. So and I would just remind, as I'm going through this, that it's one thing for me to pretend to respond to as if I'm on a debate stage with Mr. Trump, right? But you would potentially have a different kind of discussion if it's the people who are listening talking to the people on the other side of the aisle in their own families and friendships. That's important to make a distinction. So, for example, if I was on the stage and I'm hearing him talk about Antifa and all this violence, I would probably point out that the studies have shown that like 93% of these protests are completely nonviolent, right? So that's a retort strategy. From a standpoint, so that's what I was doing in the debate context. And for that matter, Trump's own administration is telling us that most of the violence, the violence of society is on the right? Right. So that's what I would say from a debate standpoint. But from a standpoint of if the listeners to this show, your esteemed fans, it's really a question. You're talking to someone on the other side, you want to raise the question, what do we know about what portion of these events, the portion of these protests that are violent? What do we know from the government about where's the threat coming from the right or the left? That's an important thing to bring up as a question. Part of what we want to do from a dialogue standpoint is to the fundamental thing we want to do is to raise questions about people's experience, right? Because that gives you a whole different conversation. We talk about people's experiences as opposed to their thoughts. It's a different kind of a connected conversation. But even when you get to analysis of the world, you want to find a way to raise, what do we know about this? What do we know about where these protests, how violent they are, or where the threat comes from, et cetera. So, but if I'm on the stage, then I'm not coming to what we know. I'm trying to slam him. I'm having a different tactic in the conversation.
Well, look, I appreciate you speaking to me. Last question I always ask my subject is, what did I not ask you that you would have wished I asked you?
I wish you would ask me the keys to dialogue, the keys to turning a moment of disconnect to a moment of dialogue, because I spent thinking about that. So I'll break that out briefly. Again, people can learn about me at thedialoguecompany.com. The keys to turning a moment of difficulty, moment of dialogue, there's really 4 steps. One, you need to, and I describe these as something called the reach method. So You got to calm down, right? That's a critical thing if you want to turn the moment, disconnect the moment of dialogue. Calm down. I call that the reflect step. You got to ask questions, because the best way to get somebody to listen to you is to listen to them first. So you got to ask questions, preferably to get them to talk about an experience. I call that's E-R-E. Then you want to ask. You want to agree and confess. You want to let them know that you give them acceptance, because their point of view is not crazy, and you confess to feeling like that at some point. There's some truth in what they're saying. So R-E-A-C, and then the last word is harmonize. You want to try to link together. You want to offer them some expanded view to have them think that what they think is not crazy, but there's a new way of thinking about it. What does that mean? Add up to the reach method, right? So you're trying to reach them. So it's important to take those 4 steps and to consciously manage the conversation so that the conversation does go from disconnect to dialogue.
And I must say that that concept works perfectly. I've been working on that with the Coffee Party and other organizations for a long time, doing that very well. Dr. David Campt, it was my pleasure having you on Politics Done Right. Thank you so kindly for having been here.
Thank you so much.
We spend a lot of time deconstructing the news, trying to parse it into a form that everybody can understand. We try to find those little nitpicks where it flies above the fray, etc. If you really like these videos that we do, I want to ask a big favor. Please go ahead. Number 1, subscribe to our channel. And number 2, please join if you can. Thank you so kindly for watching. Keep watching. Please remember to share. We must populate the entire internet with our progressive message, a message that we know is what most Americans say that they want. So help us, please join.